Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webcast. What is XDR and does it warrant investment? So we're going to start things today with Aaron Branson, our Senior Vice President of Marketing. He's going to take us through our XD market overview. In that, he'll share with us what we see as XDR. What is this? What it is not as well, why we're seeing a rise in popularity for the term XDR, and then will this stick? Will XDR stick around or will it go away? Chiming in throughout this and then running our panel after Aaron's introductions will be Guy Cunningham, our Senior Vice President of Channel Sales. Moving on from that, during the panel discussion, which I said Guy will run, we'll talk about the popularity of XDR. Why has it gotten so popular over the last couple of months, even the last year? We'll discuss the balancing of innovation and application for this process. And then we'll move a little bit beyond XDR and talk about some of the emerging technologies we see coming out. For that group, Guy will lead the panel discussion with Ananth, who is the president of Neturian, and Jeremy Kurth, who is the CTO of Logically. So without further ado, let's kick this over to Aaron Branson, and he will discuss the XDR market overview.
All right, thanks, David. So yeah, just want to kind of lay down a foundation in regards to XDR. So first, because words matter, we have to make sure we have a shared understanding of what these three letters are telling us, and so we don't devolve into the Tower of Babel, basically. So simply put, extended detection and response is as I see it, is just an evolution of threat detection and response technologies with a broader range of attack surface scope. So simply put, XDR can arguably be any platform that takes in a wide range of telemetry to cover more of an enterprise's attack surface. And secondly, using threat intelligence, machine learning, can just do a better, faster job of attack detection, and through the use of automation, orchestration, and also serving up meaningful analytics to the humans involved, ultimately deliver better and more effective response. So to better understand like why all of a sudden so many vendors claim to deliver XDR, you have to first understand that, and again, in my opinion, that this is kind of the natural progression of things. You have some solutions that started with their roots in EDR, some in network detection and response, SIEM, for example, but also cloud detection and response, and the list kind of goes on. These are just kind of three examples here. And they're each trying to solve the cybersecurity fragmentation problem of just too many specialized platforms, creating a Rube Goldberg machine of a SecOps stack, basically. So you can see that XDR isn't something that was created out of thin air, but it's the result of the continual improvement and convergence of capabilities. So what I described here is what Forrester calls a quote-unquote native XDR solution. Because it's doing the information and event ingesting itself. Now, there's another type as well, and let me get into that. So native XDR, and then also we have another type. There's a market for this new standalone XDR solution out there. These XDR solutions coexist with the detection tools that are already in play, and overlay your SIEM, your EDR, your network traffic analytics, etc. But they exist to aggregate that array of data, and from there, as an overlay, perform this function of better detection and response with automation and a single pane of glass. So Forrester calls these hybrid XDRs. Now, in my opinion, native XDR offers a more natural progression and consolidation of the security stack, while these hybrid XDRs that we're starting to see may offer more flexibility for an InfoSec team to build a more of a best of breed stack, perhaps to maybe very high demanding specifications. So also native XDR, you'll more likely see that in a co-managed security operations situation, while hybrid XDR that kind of indicates you have a robust SecOps team in-house to handle the overhead and the integrations that are going to be involved. Oops, let me go back one. So that's what XDR basically is, but what is it not? Perhaps this goes without saying, but I think it would be negligent to just not hammer this home every time we talk about a new technology. XDR is not the silver bullet that means you can finally ignore all of those annoying security awareness and hygiene practices. While it certainly can arm you against the more frequent advanced persistent threats we've been seeing this year, XDR doesn't mean anyone should let their guard down on basics. Vulnerability management, patching, account and privilege management. You can see the list goes on, all these things that you're familiar with. So those will not go away by any means. So that's what XDR is and what it isn't, really quick in a nutshell. But there is one last thing that we also frequently talk about. What about MDR? Analysts they seem to be in pretty solid agreement that when we talk about XDR, we're talking about a technology, not a service. So that's number one. So this simply means MDR service providers should absolutely be stepping up their scope of detection and response. The thing cybersecurity buyers and practitioners need to keep in mind is that MDR does not specify what threats the service provider has within their purview. Is that managed cloud detection and response, managed network detection and response, and you can see it goes on and on. Is it endpoint? So what you need to ask your MDR provider point blank is what's under the hood, and ask them about their XDR capabilities now. So then the last thing, of course, is will it stick? Is XDR another buzzword, or is it going to stick around? We know this market is prone to getting excited about shiny objects, hoping this will be the one. If you probably remember something called UEBA, it was hot for a while, and it's still important as a function, as a capability, absolutely. But like many others in the past, it was better absorbed into a more comprehensive threat protection platform like SIEM. And by the way, SIEM, security information and event management, makes a very strong foundation for an XDR solution as these all these systems evolve toward XDR. So XDR as a concept, I think it makes absolute sense. It's credible. Will there be a market for both native and hybrid XDR? I'm personally not so sure about that. I'm just not fond of yet another overlay tool added to the stack. But XDR is a capability, simply put, it's the result of continuing cybersecurity convergence, this concept of the highly fragmented set of technologies and services coming together in a more unified, practical solution. So for that reason, I think XDR will become the standard detection and response technology, and managed detection and response services will absolutely rely on it. So that's where my head's at. That as a framework, I'll kick this over to Guy and the panelists. Either break that open further or tear it down. Have at it.
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. Excuse me. I think you hit the nail on the head. As our networks extend beyond the on-premise environment, as our infrastructure moves to the cloud, as our employees move to work from anywhere types of environments, I think we have to be thinking about how we extend our tooling and our monitoring capabilities to wherever the work is being done. And so I think you're right, the extended detection and response is going to become a requirement. And then it's the services on top of that. Who's delivering the services? Is it delivered in-house? Is it delivered by a service provider? So managed extended detection and response will likely become a very common solution over the coming months. So I just wanted to introduce Ananth and Jeremy again. We're going to enter into more of a conversation here around this topic. Ananth is the president of Netsurian and has spoken on this topic frequently with analysts and with with the media. So Anant, can you spend a few minutes building on what Aaron laid the foundation for? Netshurian as a technology provider and as a service provider, we have a unique perspective on extended detection and response. Why don't you build on top of the foundation that Aaron laid as far as what is NetShurian's perspective as contrasted to what the market and the analysts might be saying?
Yeah, thank you, Guy. So first of all, it is a hype word, and it's the latest buzzword. And so I know that many of us are going to be weary because they're always coming at you fast and furious. It was only a couple of years ago, was it, that the hype word, the buzzword was EDR. And now all of a sudden, E for endpoint is somehow not enough. And we need to think about X. And that X is always mysterious, right? I mean, solve for X is what they tell you back in high school. Well, the reality is that it's an arms race. As the defenders get better and up their game, the attackers will claw over that, and that's been going on for quite some time. So the reality is, some time ago, we had antivirus for our endpoints. They were signature-based, and they were effective, maybe 10, 15 years ago, and you shouldn't have been operating an endpoint without it. But of course, the arms race happened, and the bad guys figured out that they could defeat traditional signature-based antivirus with their tactics. And so that antivirus became EDR. And this is, I don't know, 2017, 2016, somewhere around there. And you had to think about behavior-based, non-signature-based, non-traditional, in order to overcome what the attackers were doing. Well, it turns out, especially if you're paying attention to the security news, that the bad guys have overcome EDR also, and they're attacking in places where EDR isn't. For instance, they attacked you with the SolarWinds or Iron Breach in December of last year, and that was a supply chain attack. They attacked via Hafnium, the on-premise, the attack on the on-premise Exchange servers. And only a couple of weeks ago, they attacked via the Kaseya VSA. And now you could have had EDR till you were blue in the face, and none of these attacks would have been deterred the slightest. And so what's a blue team to do? The answer is you got to extend, because the attacks aren't necessarily occurring at the endpoint on your premises. They may begin at the cloud, maybe. They may begin at the network layer, maybe. They may begin at your website, maybe. And if you simply did EDR, which is a 2017-18 word, why then that might not be good enough to defend against today's threats. So going back to the concept of will it stick, I mean, it'll stick as long as it's effective. I mean, antivirus stuck for a really long time because it was effective for that period of time. And then when it wasn't, it really faded away very quickly. That will occur too with XDR, though I have higher hopes simply because it's more of an approach than a specific technology. And what XDR is really saying is, please think about your attack surface from soup to nuts. Are you in the cloud? Are you at the VPN? Are you allowing access to your endpoints? Are you working from home? Are you deploying, somewhere else in O365? So please don't limit yourself to the endpoint and then even make the further assumption that your endpoint is at the office, because that is clearly not true. So I have hopes for EDR that the concept will stick, but I guess we will see how the cookie crumbles as time goes by. So the other points that both Aaron and Guy mentioned, I think, are on target. You got to shift from a more reactive stance to a more proactive stance. And of course, we're talking about, forward-thinking, leading-edge kinds of organizations who've determined that EDR is not sufficient. But, the ground reality, as I'm sure our friends at Logically will agree, is that just getting people to patch regularly, just getting people to, please not use that same password, 10,000 times in 500 places would be a step up from where we are before we even get to anything as fancy schmancy as XDR. So as Aaron pointed out in what XDR is not, it is not a get out of jail free card. You can't and you shouldn't think I'll implement XDR and this magical shroud will appear on top of Hogwarts and Voldemort will be repelled. Nothing like that. You still have to pay attention to the basics.
That's a great analogy of the working in Harry Potter into a cybersecurity discussion. So Jeremy, Logically is a very mature, very sophisticated managed service provider. You've got customers all over the country. And I know that you've embraced the EDR concept pretty fully. So talk to us a little bit about your experience with customers embracing EDR, 2016, 2017 conversations versus today. And then, where are you in the conversations with your customers around, XDR or even MDR?
I think all three of you have made really solid points around XDR. I kind of summarize it as the what, versus MDR as the how. And so I think what's happening is we're seeing the universe of the what expand and being defined of all things technology. And I speak about our industry as a technologist as how long is the piece of string, and it extends all the way down to the end user, right? I mean, we've got social media, we've got our corporate assets, we've got our personal assets, and to Anant's point, is how far are the attack vectors going to go? They're going to continue to keep working at it. So I view XDR as just that understanding and comprehension that there are more things to look at than just the desktop. But Guy, to your point, I think our journey here at Logically, regardless of us as an MSP, our attempt in putting our clients on a roadmap and a security strategy did start, quite frankly, with the EDR. Just understanding and recognizing that today's attack vectors are circumventing the signature-based products as well as the behavioral aspects. So we had an area to pick and lay our camp, if you will. And we started really on those two cornerstones, was the EDR and for us the SIEM, and partnering with Niturion. And we felt that having discussions with our clients in terms of your second question of are they asking for XDR, I think we're the only ones that are really having that level of conversation. Our clients are looking for us as their provider to really bring them peace of mind and explain to them, where do we prioritize our work efforts as well as their spend and our resources. And XDR, candidly, is not part of that conversation. I think to Anat's point, it's kind of the newer buzzword. Aaron, you also mentioned, how it's being leveraged. And I think it's good to educate, even security providers that there's more to management of security than just an endpoint or just a network. And hence, I'm not necessarily saying I'm not in favor of XDR. I just don't know if it's really got any pertinent, specific label in today's world. And I know our customers aren't really demanding or asking for this. Our conversations with them are really around the things that, Aaron, you mentioned what XDR isn't. We're still having most of our conversations based on general good IT hygiene, whether that's making sure that our customers' networks are protected with current technologies as MFA, VPN solutions that are using geolocation or conditional access. Those are kind of the level of conversations that we're having more so than XDR, as well as getting those organizations wrapped around the concepts of how to live in a security-based technology world. We have, CEOs that still like to grab their kids' iPads to an extent and be able to check their email on it. And we're saying, no, hold off. You can't really treat technology in that way anymore because that's a direct attack vector in. So, in summary, no, our clients aren't really, demanding XDR tomorrow. Many of them don't even really understand what an EDR is, let alone the X concept. And our journey for our customers is to just try to continuously move them down a security model that puts them into a better spot to hopefully keep them out of the news, if you will.
Yeah, so I know that you guys have packaged up security offerings inside of a portfolio of packages. You got multiple secure care packages, I think is the brand that you use. And if I'm interpreting what you said correctly, your customers aren't asking for a particular technology. They're asking for you to provide them protection. They want you to make sure that they're secure.
Correct. Correct. At the end of the day, I think that other than conversations with CISOs or maybe some security-minded clients of ours, where they really want to get in and understand not just the technologies, but how are we addressing future-proofing with cloud. It really is our job, I think, as a managed service provider to educate our clients and make them aware of the things that they aren't, and also hopefully look across the stack and be business-minded and understand that, well, at least from our perspective, and I'm called into almost every incident that we respond to, understanding the origin of where these attacks are coming from. And Nath, you're exactly right. I think it shook the entire market, in terms of the recent RMM supply chain breach, and those types of events. Those candidly are not, unfortunately, they're not like a daily focus of ours. It's more so the things that are happening more and more frequent, whether it be spam. The email is still the number one inroad. If I had to guess, I don't know the percentage, but I would argue that, at least from my experience, that's still the number one thing that's occurring, is end users, unfortunately, not understanding their behavior matters. And so our packages really focus on educating those and knocking down the heavy items that we see impactful in the market. So, of course, breaches can occur through a SQL injection. Is that the number one resource, number one thing that we put in front of our customers today? Web application firewalls? Probably not. Admittedly, we still have traffic out there that's encrypted on a large portion of our environments, and I think the world is stuck in that spot. So, Guy, to your point, our packages are really designed to be around sensible improvements that hopefully knock down the major items that occur in the market. But I still stand by the concept of XDR is just it's this ever growing understanding of that there's more to it than just the desktop or just the firewall. We do need to be mindful of those things, because, and that's getting back to your point, we may not be thinking of those things, but the attack vectors sure are, right?
So Jeremy, you guys have, you're not the only person talking to your customers about security. You've got probably a roster of security experts that your teams will bring in and have conversations with customers. Your salespeople are having conversations with customers. Since the audience here is MSPs, managed service providers, I think there's an understanding that as service providers selling to end user customers, we have to be the ones that are educated about this. Yes, we're still trying to get our customers to do the basics, but that doesn't mean that we can't or shouldn't be having these more advanced conversations with them. How do you coach your own people internally to bring these concepts up with the customers, either at the right time or in the right way, so that they can wrap their heads around this, since they're not cybersecurity experts?
It's a great question, Guy. I think our approach has been continuous education of our sales, and I think that's an area that we could always improve and do better. When you start getting into the details of differentiations between SIEM connectors and talking about the value, it can get complex quite quickly. But I think one of the things that we try to do, and again, not focusing on logically per se, but I think the universe of education is around informing the value as well as why these things are important. So I would say that's one area, is continuous training within our sales, as well as there's a culture that exists. An engineer on a phone who sees something that may not be where we want it as a standard needs to be educated to the fact that that's something that a provider needs to communicate. And it's important to make sure that our customers are aware. I think the other thing that we've tried to do is, regardless of what we may deem as, if you don't have, it's kind of good if you, there's different trade-offs in life and in business, right? I think where we've arrived is knowing that those trade-offs can occur. It's still our duty and our job to communicate to the client the things that we deem and feel are important to them. And even if they don't choose the a la carte pieces, we've at least informed them and given them an opportunity to be educated on it. I used to think differently earlier in my career in terms of, if I only have one thing, this is what I would recommend. We've really taken a different approach of, this is the universe of things that you need to consider strongly. And ultimately, we'd like to get you to all of these things. If you can't, gobble them up, if you can't eat the pumpkin in one bite right now, then we're going to kind of carve them up and feed it to you one bite at a time. So I think that second thing is our approach to sticking by the fact that there are recommendations, and it is our job, regardless of whether the client is going to approve them. And in some cases, we might lose a client over this in terms of they think or feel that the things we're putting in front of them might not be appropriately sized. But when I hear that they've gone on to maybe a different provider who's not educating them on the things that we feel are important, I still stand by that we've done our job, and that's okay. So I think it's that those two-pronged approach, guys, is educating our own staff and making it part of our culture, as well as educating our customers on the things that we recommend, regardless of whether they may pursue and consume those services and solutions from us. We still deem it as our job to inform them of it.
You know, I speak to, dozens of managed service providers a week, and I'm starting to see a trend in the approach to selling cybersecurity. It's a start. It's not the majority of conversations I'm having, but some of our more mature partners, frankly, the ones that are the largest and frankly the most profitable, have taken a pretty hard stance related to cybersecurity. They realize that MSPs are a target, and so they're implementing cybersecurity measures for their own house to a much higher degree than they're necessarily mandating to their customers. They want to protect themselves because they know that if they get breached, potentially all of their customers could get breached through that. But we are starting to see MSPs having some minimum set of standards, and not just EDR and firewall, but MDR, and some are even moving towards XDR as a requirement. And if the customer chooses not to partake for those advanced services, they're either, letting them go, move on to somebody else who's not as committed to this, or they're, putting a piece of paper in front of them that says, we told you about this, you're choosing not to, here's, your release of liability. Are you at that point yet? Or are you having similar conversations with your peers across the country?
Guy, it's a great question. And again, I'm, started my initial MSP in 2002. We were a purebred MSP in 2004. And by purebred, we didn't do any break fix work. We only worked with customers that were, as I would label it, a managed services customer, based on a deliverable, not time. I think having, I don't want to be hypocritical in my response, because I think as a business owner, I certainly made a lot of constellations for customers who didn't take our recommendations. I think that's part of the free market and how it operates, right? And so I think the journey that has changed for us for growing with Logically are probably twofold. One is our capabilities as a larger MSP. I mean, when I was running a much smaller version of our company, I didn't have the resources required, or per se at that time, the partnerships, right? And I think it is our duty as an MSP community to find those partnerships and make sure that we're not allowing the limits of our own resources, because there are at this point options, to make sure that we're still standing up and making the right recommendations to a client. This is also the delineation between an MSP, MSSP, and not every MSP can be an MSSP. I hate to admit that, but as a 55-person company prior to Project of Logically, I wouldn't deem myself as being able to put forth a 24/7 SOC and really label myself as an MSSP. And I think it's about being honest with who you are, so that you're not then making the wrong recommendations to clients. So I think that's step one. Step two was around you again, to your point of having standards, being able to define those really well, and understanding that the long term versus short term is gonna win out. And we use acknowledgement of risk. We also state fairly dynamically that our acknowledgement of risk is based on our standards, which this industry changes on a whim. I think the RMM breach did raise awareness around web application firewalls. Quite frankly, we've always had them, we've always talked about them, but the fact that maybe we need to be putting that into our standard as for publicly faced apps, if we're not going to require VPN, became a quote unquote new thing. And so that standards are dynamic. Having an upfront and honest conversation with your client, to, logically as your partner, we deem it our responsibility to inform you of these, to let you be aware of the risks, and to always ask questions. But if you don't adhere to the best practices and things that we communicate to you, it does raise your risk. And so we generally come at it from kind of a general acknowledgement. We don't try to put every little pain point in front of them and say, look, you didn't do X, Y, Z, therefore. It's just merely an understanding that we exist as a provider for a reason. And then I think that's the responsible part of not chasing every shiny object like XDR, right? And being willing to say, okay, let's take a step back. Let's see what true value this brings in the market, and not just keep shifting gears on our customers, in a continuous manner. And I think as a provider, you have to be willing to hold the line, on all the new things that come out, because something that will eat this industry up, is the ever-changing availability of what's out there. So hopefully I answered your question somewhere in there.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So Anant, Jeremy's kind of thrown a lot at us. What kind of perspective do you have from a vendor, from the vendor's perspective, not the service provider's perspective?
I think he's on the money in terms of what the end customer is really pleading for, not even asking for, pleading for, and that is straight talk. As you can see from this conversation, we love tech talk, but that doesn't really leave the customer, the end customer, very satisfied at all. So your previous question of how do you engage them? Well, first is you want to knock off the jargon, because that, while we love that stuff and debate the finer points of XDR versus EDR versus MDR, it means almost nothing to the end customer who's asking plaintively, hey, can you keep me safe? What is it that I have to do? So some things that I've seen that end customers respond to much better than throwing jargon or the latest word of the day or flashing words like Kaseya and Hafnium and SolarWinds, which is big news for us, but almost probably unknown in their world. Some thoughts are, they're interested in knowing how they stack up versus others in their industry, right? What's normal? What's the standard of due care? What's everyone doing? So if everyone in your neighborhood has invested in a burglar alarm system, you're probably going to be thinking that that's something you need based on what the Joneses next door are doing. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way is, what technology have you deployed, and has that become now somehow susceptible? A simple case in point is a lot of people have gone to Microsoft 365, and Microsoft has screamed itself hoarse saying, for God's sakes, please turn on two-factor authentication. And so a way to communicate this to the buyer is to say, you already have it. You already paid for it. You're just not turning this thing on. Please, I'm begging you, turn this on, and your attack surface will reduce dramatically. Yet another way of maybe addressing that question, that reluctance to get on to the next thing. I mean, let's be honest. Most of the folks are still doing legacy antivirus. Some small portion saw the light in the last 3 years and said, yeah, okay, as my contract comes up for renewal, I'll buy this EDR thing that you're blabbing about. And so what? You're going to go back to them now, scant year later, and say, I know I told you about EDR in 2020, but that's so 2020. It's now XDR. They're going to say, get out of my face. So really, instead of saying things of that sort, you probably want to talk in terms of return on investment, because that is something that people can understand very easily. So here's the Kaseya example for you, right? If you got taken by Kaseya, the attacker said, $45,000 in Bitcoin, and I'll set the end customer free. $1 million in Bitcoin, and I'll set the MSP free. $72 million in Bitcoin, and I'll set the whole world free. Now, we don't know anyone that actually paid it, but what that does is it puts a number there in front of people to actually begin to think of. If this bad situation were to occur because you're saying, no, I want to cling to my old technology, here's the risk. Are you prepared to take that risk? Now, they were very clever about this, right? The people they attacked were probably $1 million a year businesses. And so $45,000 as an unexpected spend was painful, but not so insane that it would be rejected out of hand. That's how they kind of settled on that value. And the point to make to the prospective buyer is, you're going to do this, and then you're going to be set up as a mark, and they're going to come after you again and again and again, and your reputation will be hit, and things of that sort, rather than screaming XDR down their throat. So those would be some thoughts on how you can actually maybe communicate this, to the end customer, who really, I'm telling you again, they don't want tech talk, they want straight talk. And folks like our MSP partners, logically, are in the best position to deliver that, because that's frankly their value add. We, on the other hand, as a vendor, are busy promoting the new shiny object. But it has to translate to real life at some point, and that's where logically comes in.
Anant, again, I completely concur with, again, it dovetails to the XDR conversation, because we do need to be forward thinking, and we shouldn't be ignoring the fact that technology is continuously evolving. At this point, how long is a piece of string, right? So, but I think, to your point, it's an area that as a provider, we too often skip over because we are technologists. And Guy, I think one of the answers that I missed that I should have given is understanding what is available out of box. A properly deployed, and I hate to say it, group policy can avoid a lot of problems. And I think our industry is too quick to kind of leap into new technologies, and we skip over some of the fundamentals that are available out of box. A properly deployed account privilege, right, where you can't be elevated and you don't have individuals roaming around within a network environment with elevated privileges. If those things are truly, and these are commonly available out of box technologies that are not being leveraged in most scenarios. Same thing with the switch layer. East-west traffic with elevated privileges is the #1 way that I've seen things go north and south. And so, taking a step back and saying these are things available to us, let's put the customer on a roadmap where sometimes they're not even being asked to spend money on a solution. They're just being asked to have somebody configure it with a security-minded premise. And I think that too often for correct purposes, we've differentiated between IT services and cybersecurity services. We have to maintain that separation. At the same time, I think what's bleeding over is in order to have good cybersecurity, you have to be performing good IT. And right now, I think the world's converging on that a bit, NOC versus SOC, and we can get into arguments about that. But, Anantha, I think that point that you made around out-of-box availability, tools available to us, providers, I think we too often skip over some of the fundamentals has been my recognition.
See, the reason why folks like us are high on XDR isn't to take away from anything you said. It is that we are observing that as the topology and the technology used by the customers is changing, for example, the rapid rise of Microsoft 365, we're seeing a kind of attack which is different than before. And deploying the old technology, whether it's Active Directory group policy or it's two-factor authentication, is sometimes not sufficient. We're seeing threats born in the cloud and then migrate to the desktop. This was not something that was even dreamt of some years ago. But with COVID-19 and the fact that everyone's rushed to work from remote locations and VPNs have opened up and ports are opening up, and then people are depending upon their cloud providers much more than ever before. Look at Microsoft stock. It's probably driven by that, right? The fact of the matter is that we're seeing attacks originate in the cloud, migrate to the desktop, for example, or really be only visible at the network layer. And so our previous approach of safeguarding the endpoint has wound up becoming insufficient. This is why vendors like us are high on XDR type technology, because we have to think about how to protect against the arms race. It is agreed and accepted, your point, that there's a progression, right? You can't jump to step 4 before you haven't finished step 2. And it happens in Monopoly, right? If you wind up going to jail, you will go directly to jail. You will not pass go. You will not collect $200. Them's the rules. I can't do anything about that. And it applies to everybody, prince or pauper. So yeah, there is a progression, but then vendors like us must think about these kinds of things, because that's where the evolution is occurring in attacks.
Completely agreed. And I think that's exactly why, and myself and others are wanting to pursue these solutions and incorporate them into our offerings. I think in response to Guy's earlier question around what types of requests are you getting and conversations you're having with your clients, it's to demonstrate that divide in terms of the education in the market. It's a massive gap. I also think in addition to education, I think the market as it serves for most MSPs is dramatically underserved as it relates to security, period. I think that, and myself included as maybe in my previous life as a smaller MSP owner, there was more that I wanted to be able to provide and more I wanted to be able to do. And so I think those two things hopefully will continue to converge over time, increase in education, as well as vendors like yourselves pushing the envelope so that we are and do have access to things that can protect our customers in a smarter, better way. The attack vector that you just described, we've seen that as well play out right in front of us. And so it's a very challenging thing when it's like, oh, we didn't even have eyes and ears on that environment to the level that we needed. So I'm right there with you.
So I've got
what we frankly like about XDR, sorry, Guy.
Yeah, go ahead.
What we like about XDR is the fact that it's adaptive. right? I mean, it's not a static defense, meaning that
Exactly.
as the attack occurs, the defensive technique learns and gets better. Whereas a lot of the other technologies that we deployed in previous years, whether it's firewall or it's antivirus, deployed by the vendor, they were relatively static. You configured the rules, and then if someone figured out a way to get past the rules, you were toast. They won, you lost. The same kind of thing occurred with antivirus. There were a set of signatures that the vendor had distributed, and they would distribute new rules every day, maybe, or new signatures every day, or twice a day, or 3 times a day. But if that signature hadn't been found and hadn't been, deployed, then you were toast. Whereas what we like with XDR, which builds on EDR, is there is an element of intelligence to it. There is an element of adaptability to it. It's not atomic. If you got attacked at one point somewhere in one customer, you can then learn and deploy that same defense across all endpoints, not just for that customer, but for every other customer. And so that raises the bar for the attacker. I mean, look, we're not going to make them good guys. That's their mother's problem. We just want them to stop nagging us and move on to the next guy. So if we can become a harder target than the guy down the street, then our job is done. We don't need to solve the problem, endlessly. And that's why we kind of like XDR for that reason.
So one of the things that Jeremy articulated was that sometimes it's difficult to do the basics with your customers. The customers, you're always bringing on new customers. They're changing their infrastructure, moving to different applications, different cloud infrastructure. And it feels to me like a constant catch-up game, just blocking and tackling to a degree. So Anant, I'm wondering if you see any benefit for an XDR type of technology to fill in those gaps, to help protect things that those, a missed block or a missed tackle, what we would consider to be the basic hygiene, if a breach or an attack would get through that because of that constant catch-up process that an MSP has, would an XDR type of technology kind of fill in the gaps and be a last stop?
It can. I mean, it's equivalent to wearing suspenders and a belt, and you hope that your pants really don't fall down. If one fails, and then the other will save you. But there's a progression, right? You want to do the basic stuff first if you can, well, at least before you embark on the more expensive stuff. The objection to that approach, frankly, comes from a cost perspective. If you haven't done all the free stuff that you already paid for last year when you upgraded to Windows 10 or Server 2019 or M365, then how are you going to convince that buyer that he needs to pay or she needs to pay even more now just because they were somehow not fulfilling? It can happen, and frankly, it does happen to some extent in certain industries. Financial is, famous for this. It does happen in some geographies, more often in North America than in other geographies. But it's an inefficient approach, and one rails against that kind of thing. You want to take advantage of what you got first. But your point is correct. The suspenders can help you if your belt fails, because you don't want that embarrassing situation.
All right, so we're at about 10 or 15 minutes left in the time that we had allotted. Aaron, if you wouldn't mind, move us forward to the cybersecurity maturity model. Jeremy, I'd like to get your take on this. So obviously, customers start where they are. When you bring on a new customer, they're in some perspective, some position along this maturity model, and it's not just a static, linear type of model. There's multiple areas. We've mapped the NIST cybersecurity framework, at least the first 4 quadrants of that to this model here. You've got to be able to predict where attacks are going to likely happen. NIST would describe that as identify. You also obviously want to prevent as many attacks as possible with kind of static in-place technologies like your EDR, like your firewall. But then the detection and response is becoming almost a requirement nowadays, because we know that attacks are going to get past those preventative defenses. So you need to be able to detect when that happens, and reduce the dwell time in the network. Even if you have some nominal detection and response capabilities, that doesn't mean that you're done. There's greater and greater levels of maturity that you can guide your customers to. Talk to us a little bit about how you're taking your customers from an operational cybersecurity perspective into an optimized cybersecurity perspective, and what are some of the challenges you and your sales teams might be bumping up against?
Great question. So Guy, I think where I probably, and this is again just my opinion and focus, I tend to home in on that prevent row pretty strongly. And an example, let's say on the next gen firewall, I would challenge the MSP community to put a percentage of how many of their firewalls are enforcing GeoIP blocking outbound or outbound at all. And and I'm not trying to make a particular point, but I do think that there is a pretty high, overwhelming percentage of customers throughout the world that don't have anything like that. And yet, when we look at the actualities of what occurs in a breach, commonly it's a CNC that goes to one of these named or stated countries by a high percentage, I would imagine. Again, I don't know the stats, and I've heard the joke that 67% of stats are made up on the spot, but I don't want to be that guy. But I'm just speaking from my own experience with our team members. That prevention piece, I think there's area for work, to be done. So I do generally like look in that pocket and look at big easy wins. But to the collective audience's point, I'm in agreement that we need to be future proofing and looking at, okay, these are the basic IT 101s that we can accomplish now. But I try to knock out in the journey for a customer. I try to focus in on that prevention row, probably a little harder than I would say most, maybe, I guess would be the way that I would summarize. But then making the recommendations of always inching them and putting them on a roadmap that gets them into that upper top right corner. We're definitely telling them up front, look, you're on a journey and this is the area that we're going to take you. And if you want to buy the whole pumpkin right now, we can get it done. But we're commonly, for either business or impact reasons, asked to kind of consume it in a bit different way, right? And moving a 1,000-person company into a roadmap of security is quite different than moving a 100-person company. There's behavioral pieces around the end users and their access to things and how they go about things and their processes. And so, I think all of these pieces are extremely important. And I think you start putting a scorecard together for your customer based on your best practices that you've got. Do they have a SIEM? Yes or no? Then the follow-up question is, where is that SIEM integrated, right? And then I pull up NetShurion's connection page, and I'm like, man, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. We're only incorporating a handful of these things. I mean, that journey is a very important one for us to expand. So I think I'm answering your question in there, but how we look at this is, first, let's focus on the quick, easy hits if we can, but then also be constantly ensuring and telling our clients that we're going to take you into this full journey. You need ultimately all of this. Like there's a reason that all of this exists. They can be weighed or weighted, differently in terms of risk, obviously, and cost. But there is a reason for all of these technologies here, and one can make an absolute case and argument that this isn't even the full list. So that's how I would respond to that.
Yeah. So not in a post-COVID world, I'm sure you have some observations about this, but I also want to ask about answer that question, and then I'll remember what my second part of my question was.
Well, first thing is to echo what Jeremy was saying. This is a great slide in terms of figuring out what the as-is situation is, and then asking the customer what they think their to-be situation needs to be, and that then allows us to build a roadmap to get from here to there. Frankly, it is the customer that dictates the risk appetite, not us. It's the same as the buyer of health insurance decides what coverage he or she really wants, and therefore in exchange, what premium are they prepared to pay? We can't really dictate that from outside. It's their appetite and their concern. So this slide is very helpful in terms of helping us in that area. One thing that has changed, to answer your question around COVID, is that people have migrated to the cloud like all get out. And there is unfortunately a view that has taken root that by doing so, they have absolved themselves of all blame. It's now Microsoft's problem, to secure it. Back in the day when I had servers on my premises, it was my problem. But now that Exchange has gone there and Office 365 is in the mix, now it's not my problem anymore. And nothing could be really further from the truth. Cloud providers are anxious to tell you that there is security off the cloud versus security in the cloud. And you shouldn't confuse one from for the other. It's still your data. It's still your responsibility to implement two-factor authentication. You're still supposed to safeguard your credentials and not hand them out like the Halloween candy. And if you don't do that, Microsoft is not taking the blame for this. So in a post-COVID world, the situation has changed somewhat, and you do need to, particularly with those that have taken advantage of the cloud and its offerings, you have to remind them about the shared responsibility. What is on the Microsoft or Google or whoever your Amazon or whoever your provider is, their responsibility side of the ledger, and what still remains with you. And of the stuff that remains with you, what is under your control and what may be provided to you by your MSP. So this picture gets affected by those kinds of things.
Anant, I'll jump in. That's a very, very good point, because I think the cloud, while it's a whole other topic on its own, I think it has lent itself to bleed into the security education. I was once told by an IT director, we don't need EDR because we have no data on our servers. And I just scratched my head. I didn't understand that his access to these cloud platforms are through the desktop. So yeah, I think you're 100% right. Obviously, it dovetails into other discussions like DR and backup, but that's a very, very good point about the cloud. So
yeah. So one final question for both of you. I think there's, especially within small business customers, there's a perception that, as they look at a slide like this, I don't need all those technologies and capabilities on the far right because I'm just a small business customer. Nobody's going to be coming after my data. So why don't you guys wrap up with your thoughts on, whether or not this is overly optimistic for kind of the SMB mid-market customer, or is this something that is realistic for customers of all sizes?
Well, I'll respond that some of our smallest customers are eager to spend the most. They have the most to lose. They're commonly business owners that are potentially high earners or whatnot, and they're protecting assets and information. So, Guy, I think as long as those technologies and resources are available to them and are relatively cost conscious, which we rely on vendors like NetShurion to make that true. I think the concept of a SIEM back in 2010 is very different, in terms of what today that means to today, and that again is the vendors driving that progression. So, Guy, I answer the question slightly different. I think that every size of business can have a discussion here, but I also agree with Anant that it's really up to their own personal risk appetite. I think incidents like the pipeline. At least here in San Diego, we had Scripps that was breached and was put out of business, a very high-profile local medical health. And I think those events, aside from the provider continuously educating the customers, there's nothing, I think, more powerful and potent than something like that occurring right in your own backyard. And so I think every size of business is going to and will want to get into that upper right quadrant, or I should say tackle all columns. It's really up to vendors and providers to close that gap to make it affordable, or something that they deem is worth paying in order to remove the risk that they've defined on their own palette.
So not to get the last word.
My view, Guy, I think I can point back to the Kaseya attack from a few days ago. Kaseya said that about 1,600 end customers got hammered via some 60 or so MSPs. And I'll bet you a lot of those 1,600 end customers said, little old me, nobody cares about little old me. Well, our evil did, and they came after you, and they demanded, what, 45,000 in Bitcoin to unlock you? And what is it that you had done wrong here, by the way? You were still as obscure as you were the day before, and still they got you. So that fact, that little old me thing is a myth that has been busted time and time again. In another sense, you could read, describe what they're saying as, if this is bleeding edge, what you've got on the screen right now, tell me what's good enough. What's the standard of due care that I must really apply? And then some of the fancy schmancy stuff. But you know, the problem again is what was fancy schmancy only a year or two ago is run-of-the-mill ho-hum now. I mean, seriously, are you going back to legacy antivirus? You know, 3 years ago, EDR with its behavior analytics and whatnot was fancy schmancy. Now it's everyday stuff. And how many people do we know that are still clinging to day before yesterday's technology? By the way, we're not doing this for TVs. Everyone switched over to the latest LCD and the plasma. Right? No one's sticking on to the old tube and denying that color TV is a thing. But why are you doing that with your security when it has the potential to hurt you as much as it does? So, but I do believe that the straight talk component, you know, where you explain to them what's good enough in this slide, what's the standard of due care that you must apply, failing which, frankly, you're going to be negligent. Right? That's the conversation that needs to occur rather than wowing them with this and insisting that they be in the top right and so on. As Jeremy pointed out, it's a journey. You're not getting to optimize. Like even the NSA, I'd argue with you, with all of their infinite money, isn't optimized. Otherwise, you would have never heard of Edward Snowden, right? So it's a journey for all of us. And there's no need to worry about it. You just need to get better a day at a time. So take this in that spirit.
Excellent. Well, I know that we're just shy of the top of the hour. This has been a lively and I think informative conversation. Thanks to both of you. Thanks to Aaron for laying the groundwork on the definition of XDR. And David, I'll turn it back to you to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Guy. Jeremy, Ananth, really appreciate it. Thank you both so much. Guy, thanks so much for moderating this. Again, like you mentioned, lively discussion, really brought out a lot of great points. And Aaron for setting the table. Really appreciative of everybody joining us today. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.